Voicemail from my grandmother's lawyer lasted 47 seconds. I know because I played it 6 times standing in the parking lot of the Loblaws on Yonge Street, my groceries sweating through the plastic bags at my feet, the January wind off Lake Ontario cutting straight through my coat like it had somewhere to be. He said my name. He said estate. He said your grandmother has made some revisions. He said to call back at my earliest convenience. My grandmother was not sick. My grandmother was not dying. She was 73 years old and still drove herself to her aquafit class every Tuesday morning at the Scarborough YMCA. Revisions didn't make sense. Nothing about that voicemail made sense, except that it did. Because somewhere in the back of my mind, in the part I'd spent 2 years trying to soundproof, I already knew exactly what had happened. I knew who had happened. Let me back up. Before I tell you what my mother found on my brother's laptop that unraveled everything, I need you to understand what the previous 2 years had looked like, because this didn't start with a phone call in a parking lot. It started slowly, the way all quiet damage does. My grandmother raised me in a lot of ways. My mother worked doubles at the hospital most of my childhood. She's a registered nurse, always has been. And my father left when I was 4. So it was my grandmother who picked me up from school, who braided my hair badly but with great enthusiasm, who taught me to make her Portuguese custard tarts, even though we're not Portuguese and she just liked the recipe. She called me her little shadow because wherever she went in her townhouse in East York, I was 2 steps behind her dragging a stuffed rabbit named Gerald. My brother is 6 years older than me. By the time I was following my grandmother around her kitchen, he was a teenager who wanted nothing to do with any of us. He was the kind of kid who made everything feel like an inconvenience. Every family dinner was too long. Every birthday was too much fuss. Every question was a personal attack. He grew into a man who was more of the same, just with a better haircut and a condo in Mississauga. His name is irrelevant to me now. In this story, he's just my brother. That's all he gets. For most of my adult life, the relationship between my brother and my grandmother was distant but polite. He showed up at Christmas, he called on her birthday. She always lit up when he walked in because she's that kind of woman. She gives everyone the best version of herself, even when they haven't earned it. I told myself it was fine. Families are complicated. Not everyone is close. What I didn't know, what none of us knew, was that over the past 2 years, my brother had been having private conversations with my grandmother. Long phone calls, occasional Sunday visits, and in those conversations, according to what my grandmother would later tell my mother through tears, I'd been saying some very hurtful things, that I found her exhausting, that I only visited out of obligation, that I told a friend her apartment smelled like old people and I dreaded going there, that I thought she was getting senile and I'd confided in my brother that I wasn't sure she should still be living alone. None of that was true. Not one word of it. I would sooner cut off my own hand than say those things about the woman who essentially raised me. But my brother had been delivering these messages carefully over months, framing them as things he was reluctant to share, playing the role of the concerned older sibling who hated to be the bearer of bad news. He'd shown her text messages, screenshots, conversations that looked like they were from my number, from my name. I didn't know any of this was happening. I noticed my grandmother seemed a little cooler on the phone, a little more formal. I told myself she was tired. I told myself she was busy. I booked a lunch with her in November and she canceled twice, which had never happened before, not once in my entire life. I sent her a card for her birthday with a note inside that I spent an embarrassing amount of time writing, and she thanked me in a text that said, "Thanks, sweetie," and nothing else. I cried about that text in my car. Then I told myself I was being dramatic. The day of the parking lot voicemail, I called the lawyer back. He was kind, professional, careful with his words. He told me my grandmother had updated her will and that I had been removed as a beneficiary. He told me this wasn't something he could discuss in detail, but that my grandmother had made the decision of her own free will and was of sound mind. He told me if I had questions, I should speak with her directly. I sat in my car for 20 minutes before I could drive. I want to be clear about something. The money was not the point. My grandmother is not wealthy. We're talking about a modest estate. her townhouse, some savings, a few pieces of jewelry that matter more for sentimental reasons than financial ones. The point was that my grandmother, the woman who braided my hair and made custard tarts with me on Saturday afternoons, now believed I thought she smelled like old people. The point was that somewhere in the last 2 years she had gone from calling me her little shadow to cutting me out of her will without a single conversation. The point was the silence. The point was the silence. The point was that I had lost her, and I hadn't even known it was happening. I drove to my mother's house. I need to pause here and tell you about my mother because she matters enormously to what happens next. She is the opposite of dramatic. She is steady and practical, and she processes things slowly and out loud, which means a lot of long pauses mid-sentence while she thinks. She spent 30 years as a nurse, and she has seen enough of the world that very little rattles her. She does not catastrophize. She does not leap to conclusions. When I told her about the voicemail, standing in her kitchen in Scarborough while she made tea, she wouldn't end up drinking. She listened to the whole thing without interrupting. Then she was quiet for a long time. "Something's wrong," she finally said. Not dramatically. Just factually, the way she'd say the stove was still on. "I know something's wrong," I said. "That's what I'm telling you." "No," she said. "I mean something specific is wrong. Your grandmother doesn't do things like this. Not like this. Not without talking to you first." She paused again. "When did you last actually see her?" "Not Cole. See? I thought about it. October? We'd had coffee and she'd seemed fine, warm, normal. That was 3 months ago." "He's been going to see her," my mother said slowly. We both knew who she meant. My mother didn't say anything else. She just picked up her phone and called my brother. It went to voicemail. She left a message that was polite and gave nothing away because my mother plays things close to the chest when she needs to. Then she sat down at her kitchen table with her laptop. Now here is the thing about my brother. He's not a careful person. He's the kind of person who believes he's smarter than everyone in the room and that confidence makes him sloppy. He had used my mother's old Dropbox account, the family one she'd set up years ago to share photos, to store some files. He'd stopped using it years back. Or so we all assumed. My mother had never cancelled the account. She still paid the $2 a month for it out of habit, the way you keep a gym membership you've forgotten about. She opened it that night, looking for an old photo she vaguely remembered uploading years ago. She wasn't looking for anything. She was just sitting with a discomfort, doing something with her hands, the way she does. She found a folder she didn't recognize. Inside it were documents, screenshots, things that had been saved there and, she would later realize, occasionally edited there, because the Dropbox autosync meant they appeared on the old family laptop she still kept in the spare room, the one my brother had used whenever he visited and assumed no one else touched. There were text message screenshots, conversations that looked like they were between me and my brother, in which I said terrible things about my grandmother. There were 2 of them. They looked real. The formatting was right, the name was right, my profile photo was there. Except, my mother looked at the timestamps. One of the conversations was dated to a Thursday in August. She checked her own phone. That Thursday in August, I had been with her. We'd driven up to Barrie together to drop off furniture at my cousin's new apartment. We'd left at 7 in the morning and hadn't gotten back until nearly 9 at night. The timestamps on the conversation showed me sending messages at 11:15 a.m. and 2:40 p.m. that day. I wasn't anywhere near my phone at 11:15 a.m. on that Thursday. I was in the passenger seat of my mother's Corolla eating a gas station sandwich somewhere on the 400. She called me. It was almost midnight. "I need you to come back," she said. Not panicked. Just the same flat, certain voice. I found something. I was back in her kitchen by 12:30. She turned the laptop toward me and let me look for myself. I want to try to describe what it feels like to see a fake conversation that has your name on it, your photo, your number, saying things you would never say about someone you love. There's a specific kind of cold that comes with it. Not like being outside in winter. Like something internal has been unplugged. I read it twice, and the second time I felt less shocked and more just tired. So tired. Because it confirmed something I think I'd been afraid to let myself believe, that it had been intentional. That someone who shared my last name had sat down deliberately and fabricated evidence to turn my grandmother against me. It wasn't a misunderstanding. It wasn't exaggeration. It was constructed. My mother had already found a second document by the time I got there. A note, not a text, an actual typed note that appeared to be a summary of a conversation my brother had claimed to have with me, in which I'd supposedly expressed concerns about my grandmother's mental state and suggested the family look into care homes. He had apparently shown this to my grandmother in person, presenting it as something he felt she deserved to know. He did this on purpose, I said, which was a stupid thing to say out loud because of course he did. I know, my mother said. For 2 years. I know. She was quiet again. Then she said, I'm going to see your grandmother tomorrow morning. I said I would come with her. She shook her head. Not yet. Let me go first. I don't know exactly what my mother said to my grandmother the next morning. She was gone for almost 3 hours, and she didn't answer when I texted to check in. When she called me afterward, her voice was different. Not broken, but wrung out the way you sound after you've cried properly and come back to yourself. She told me my grandmother had been devastated, that when my mother showed her the timestamps, showed her the dates, walked her through the specific impossibility of those conversations, my grandmother had started shaking. Not from anger, first. From grief. She said she kept saying she should have called me. She said she'd wanted to call me, but she'd been too hurt. She said my brother had told her I probably wouldn't answer. He had built the prison and then told her the doors were locked. My mother brought the laptop. She showed my grandmother the Dropbox folder. She showed her where the files were saved, how they'd been edited, the metadata that didn't line up. My grandmother is not a technical person, but she understood enough. She understood that someone had made things up. She understood which someone. My mother called me an hour later and said, "Come now." I drove to my grandmother's townhouse in East York for the first time in 3 months. She opened the door before I knocked. She looked smaller than I remembered, or maybe I was just seeing her differently. She reached up and put both hands on my face the way she used to when I was little. The way she'd do when she wanted to look at me properly. She said, "I'm so sorry, sweetheart. I should have asked you. I should have asked you first." I didn't say anything for a while. We just stood in her doorway. I want to be careful here because I don't want to skip over this moment the way stories sometimes do, rushing towards the resolution because the resolution is more satisfying. The truth is that standing there, I felt a complicated thing. Relief, yes, but also something lonelier. The 2 years of thanks sweetie texts, the cancelled lunches, the growing silence I'd been trying not to read into. The damage was real even if the cause was now explained. I think I let myself feel that for just a second in her doorway before I stepped inside. She made tea. I sat at her kitchen table. She got out the little tin where she keeps the good biscuits, the digestive ones with the chocolate on the bottom, and put it in front of me the way she's done since I was 8 years old. Small gestures matter. That gesture broke me a little in the best possible way. We talked for a long time. She told me everything my brother had said to her, and I told her none of it was true, and she told me she knew that now, and we went in circles for a while, the way you do when you're both trying to figure out how to come back from something. She told me she'd felt confused because I hadn't reacted to her distance. I told her I'd thought she was just tired. She laughed a little at that. Not a happy laugh, a sad one. We'd both been so careful not to make trouble that we'd let the trouble sit between us for 2 years unopposed. I asked her if she was going to call my brother. She thought about it for a long moment. Then she said, "I already did." She'd called him that morning while my mother was still there. She'd put him on speaker. She'd asked him plainly to explain the timestamps. She told me there was a long silence on the line. Then he'd started with the usual moves. She was confused. The technology was complicated. My mother was trying to manipulate her. There must be an explanation. My grandmother is a gentle woman, but she is not a foolish one. She'd listened to him not answer the question for about 2 minutes, and then she'd said, I think you should take some time before we speak again." And she'd hung up. My mother, in the meantime, had taken photographs of everything in the Dropbox folder. She consulted a family friend who does civil litigation, not to pursue anything immediately, but to understand what documentation meant, what options existed. I'm not going to tell you what's happening with that part because it's ongoing and it's not fully mine to share. What I will tell you is that my brother sent me a single text message 4 days later. It said he thought I'd always been the favorite and he'd grown tired of watching everyone make less of him because of it. That was it. That was the whole explanation. A lifetime of diminishment he'd decided was my fault, redirected into 2 years of careful, deliberate sabotage. I didn't respond. I'm still not sure I will. The will was revised again. I don't bring this up because of what it means financially. I want to say that again clearly because I know how it sounds. I bring it up because of what it meant symbolically, what it meant to my grandmother to take that specific action, and what it meant to me to know she'd taken it. She called me when it was done, and she just said, I needed to fix what was broken. That was all. The part that stayed with me, long after the logistics settled, the lawyer calls, the documents, my mother's careful folder of photographs, was the 2 years of lunches I didn't get. The 2 years of my grandmother believing something false about me, quietly, alone in her townhouse in East York. I think about her sitting there thinking I found her exhausting. I think about her "thanks, sweetie" text and how she must have felt writing it, believing what she believed. I thought a lot about the version of events where my mother never opened that Dropbox folder, where she never went looking for that old photo and never found that folder by accident. I think about my grandmother and I, slowly becoming strangers, each of us too polite and too careful to say something feels wrong here. The version where we never come back from it, that version scares me more than anything my brother actually did. The Tuesday after everything came out, I drove to the Scarborough YMCA and met my grandmother after her aquafit class. I hadn't done that since I was a kid, waiting on a bench outside with a snack my grandmother had packed for herself and then given to me. She came out in her big winter coat, her swim bag over one shoulder, her white hair still damp at the edges. She saw me and her face did something complicated. Then she walked over and looped her arm through mine the way she always used to, and we walked to the little cafe around the corner that does the good soup. And we sat in the window and watched the January cold do its worst outside while we were warm in there together. She told me about a woman in her aquafit class who'd just become a great-grandmother for the first time. I told her about a work thing that had been stressing me out. She stole one of my fries even though she'd said she didn't want any. It was ordinary. It was the most valuable thing I've owned in a long time. My brother thought that by making himself seem like the devoted one, he could rewrite which of us mattered more. What he didn't understand, what people like that never seem to understand, is that the relationships worth having aren't built on appearances or proximity or inheritance. They're built on Tuesday mornings and stolen fries and the small specific knowledge of someone accumulated over decades that no amount of fake screenshots can undo. He didn't lose something that was always mine. He lost something that was always his to lose. I keep thinking about that tin of biscuits, the digestive ones with the chocolate on the bottom, the same tin she's had since I was 8 years old. The fact that she still put it on the table in front of me, even after everything, that small, automatic gesture of knowing me, is the thing that got me the most. Not the will, not the lawyer's call. That tin. What my brother did was deliberate and it took patience. That's the part I keep coming back to. It wasn't a moment of anger or a careless mistake. He built something over 2 years, brick by brick, message by message, visit by visit. He understood exactly which relationship would hurt the most to lose, and he went after it methodically. And for a long time it worked. Not because my grandmother was foolish, and not because I was oblivious, but because neither of us thought someone who shared our family would do something like that. That assumption of basic decency is not a weakness. It's just what trust looks like from the inside. But here's what I've understood since. The thing that unraveled his plan wasn't dramatic. It was my mother sitting at her kitchen table late at night, doing something with her hands, because she was unsettled, opening an old account out of habit. looking for a photo she couldn't even remember uploading. That's it. No confrontation, no ultimatum. Just a woman who raised me paying attention when something felt off and being honest enough with herself to follow that feeling instead of explaining it away. I think about the kind of person it takes to do that, to sit with discomfort rather than smooth it over, to pursue what's true even when the easier thing would be to assume you misread the room. That's not a small thing. That's a way of moving through the world that my mother built over decades, quietly without ever calling it a virtue. She'd probably roll her eyes if I said it out loud to her. But I notice it. I've been noticing it my whole life. And my grandmother, the fact that she heard the truth and chose to sit with the grief of having believed something false rather than defending the choice she'd made, that took something too. It would have been easier to double down, to find a reason the timestamps were wrong, to protect herself from the discomfort of having been deceived by her own grandson. She didn't do that. She picked up the phone and asked the hard question, and when the answer wasn't good enough, she ended the call. That's not nothing. That's integrity, operating quietly under pressure. I didn't fight for myself in this story. I didn't know there was a fight. What I did, without knowing I was doing it, was keep showing up to the relationship, to the small, ordinary moments of it, in a way that made the fabrications unconvincing to anyone who looked closely enough. The real record of who I am existed in the 1,000 Tuesday mornings and borrowed fries and badly braided hair. My brother could fake a text message. He couldn't fake that. I don't know what becomes of him. That part isn't mine to carry. What I know is that the relationships worth having are maintained through something that can't be edited or deleted or saved to a folder in someone else's cloud. They're maintained through showing up, honestly, over time, without an audience. My grandmother and I are still working our way back to each other. Some lunches feel completely normal. Some feel like we're both being a little careful. I think that's okay. I think that's what it looks like to rebuild something with care instead of just pretending the damage didn't happen. The tin is still on the table when I come over. That's enough for now.